Good morning. What's going on, Ice Physio crew? Dr. Zach Long here for Fitness Athlete Friday, the best day of the week when it comes to the Ice Daily Show. I'm excited to talk to you today and answer a listener question about bench press related shoulder pain in some athletes that this clinician was working with. So before we get started talking about bench press related shoulder pain, got to mention April 7th, Las Vegas, Nevada, the Ice Sampler is coming up. Something you really want to check out. We've got 9 faculty members showing up to teach their absolute best material over the course of 2 days. And of course, it's in Vegas. So it's going to be a great time to learn and have some fun. So check that out at ptonice.com. Again, that's the Ice Sampler starting on April 7th. So I had somebody reach out to me this week wanting me to discuss bench press related shoulder pain, something that they're seeing a little bit more of in their practice. And the bench press seems like a relatively simple exercise to perform. Athlete lies on a bench press, pulls their shoulder blades back, gets barbell directly over their shoulders, brings the barbell down to their chest or upper stomach, and then presses up. But it is something that we see people do wrong from a movement performance standpoint a lot, and definitely something to do wrong from a programming perspective. So we're going to hit on those things a little bit today to help those of you that are rehab providers have a couple more tools in your pocket for helping people getting shoulder pain with the bench press. So first, let's talk a little bit more about the technique of the bench press. When an athlete's set up in a bench press, the cue that we're typically using as a performance cue is to pull the shoulder blades back and down. So we're going to get that strong retraction and depression of the shoulder blades before their shoulders go into a position of shoulder extension. Now, that is a position that is often very difficult for patients to maintain. We'll see a lot of times as they get down to the bottom, rather than keeping that shoulder blade locked down and back, they lose positioning and they end up doing an anterior tilt of their shoulder blade, end up rounding in the shoulders a little bit, and placing a little unnecessary stress on the anterior shoulder. So from a biomechanics perspective, that's one of the things that we'll see leading to that anterior shoulder pain with the bench press. Now, we'll talk in a little bit about why that happens. I want to mention one other big technique thing that you want to look for as a physical therapist when athletes are performing bench press or push-ups and getting anterior shoulder pain. You'll see a lot of athletes go and they'll do like a T motion. Now, some athletes will use that to preferentially target their pec major by going really wide with their elbows, so they're actually in like 90 degrees of abduction in the bottom of the bench press. But for most people, to get the best bang for your buck from a performance perspective and to use the most available musculature, we're probably going to be somewhere around a 45-degree angle. So if I see an athlete that's benching at about a 90-degree angle, and they're not doing that because they understand that that will allow them to use their pecs more, and that's somebody that I'm actually thinking is probably going to be a little bit weaker in their triceps, and because of that, they're going and trying to use their pecs a little bit larger of a muscle. Not to be stereotypical here at all, but typically you're going to see females do this a lot more often than you do males, but you'll see it in males a lot too. And in that case, I'm going to cue somebody to bring their elbows down. I'm going to let them know ahead of time, like, hey, the weight that you can bench is going to drop down, or the number of push-up reps that you can do is probably going to drop down. But long-term, for your shoulder health, this is going to help us spread that load over a larger amount of muscles, and it's going to probably help you keep your shoulders a little bit healthier. So that's what we want to look at from a technique perspective. Probably more important than that is looking at their programming, and that's something that unfortunately a lot of physical therapists just aren't incredibly skilled at, is analyzing somebody's programming. But with the bench press, that's incredibly important. Looking at the total volume of pushing. Everybody wants big chest, big arms. Everybody wants a big bench press. So a lot of times in athletes that aren't following a solid program, you'll see a huge imbalance in the amount of work that they're doing bench press. You'll see some athletes that bench press every single day of the week. And that's just something that eventually is going to lead to them not being able to recover from that volume of pressing, and eventually they're going to develop some sort of performance decline or injury as a result of that volume of pressing. There's a couple of general rules in the strength and conditioning world you'll hear thrown around where a lot of people will say a 1-to-1 ratio between pressing exercises and pulling exercises. You'll hear some people say a 2-to-1, 2 pulling exercises for every 1 pressing. I don't follow any strict rule there, but I do just want to look for a general trend in somebody's programming. Are they imbalanced in the number of pushing and pulling exercises that they perform? If they have been imbalanced in that for a long time, maybe we do need to bias them towards that 2 pulling to 1 pushing ratio, but just something to consider. Something else to consider that a lot of physical therapists don't understand is the impact that back squats can actually have on the bench press. The back squat position in that externally rotated position, a lot of athletes are really tight and have trouble getting into great position there. And you'll actually see, because they have such a hard time getting into a squat position, that that they end up also contributing to some of that anterior shoulder pain by squatting a lot. So sometimes if somebody's coming to you with pain with bench press, and you check out some of the mobility stuff that we'll talk about later, you look at their technique, you look at their programming, and all of that's good, then one modification you might want to go with is, hey, we're going to back off on back squats for a little bit. We're going to go front squats, or we're going to do safety squat bar squats, something to take a little stress off of the anterior shoulder during your squat work so that we can allow for pain-free bench press. Now, the safety squat bar, if you're a physical therapist working with fitness athletes, that's something that I highly recommend you checking out. It's an awesome piece of equipment where the barbell sits on the back, but there are these little bars that come forward. So the athlete can actually hold the bar with their hands directly in front of their chest. It takes a lot of strain off of the shoulders, but most of us can't afford to put that in the clinic, or it's just not a very high priority piece of equipment in our physical therapy clinics. So if that's the case, I'm going to tell you about 2 modifications you can do. I'm going to show it here. If you're listening on the podcast, I apologize, you won't be able to see this, but you can take a large resistance band or like weightlifting straps that most weightlifters use when they're doing something like a deadlift, and you can put it around the barbell and have it hooked like this, so that when the barbell's on their back, you can actually have them hold from there. And you can kind of create your own safety squat bar with equipment that you either already have in the clinic or your athletes are already taking with them to the gym. Just a really good quick fix to decrease a little bit of anterior shoulder pain in people that are maybe getting overloaded from the back squat. Now, if we're looking at somebody's bench press and maybe they're doing that anterior shoulder tipping that we discussed earlier, they can't keep the shoulder blades locked down and back into that depressed, retracted position that we want to see with the bench press, what am I going to look at? I'm going to analyze 3 things typically. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually see, can they actually do a good job of performing isolated scapular retraction? So if I'm looking at them from the side, I'll have them put their hands down on their thigh. And usually if they're wearing pants that have a seam going down the side, I tell them, put your middle finger on that seam, hold your hands right there, and I want you to retract your shoulder blades back. And what I'm going to do is look at, can they perform that scapular retraction without going into thoracolumbar extension? We'll see a lot of athletes that can't disassociate those 2 movements. And that's somebody that I know we need to work out their mobility or control on pulling those shoulder blades back without moving anything else. The second thing I'm going to look at is their shoulder extension range of motion. In the fitness athlete world, everybody's talking about mobility these days. I want good overhead mobility. I want good external rotation. Nobody ever looks at shoulder extension. And if you think about it, as an athlete goes into a bench press, eventually they're going to get to where their shoulder is actually going into extension. And I'll find a lot of athletes that run out of the extension range of motion, and as a result, they have to go through that anterior tipping of the scapula, lose that down and back strong position for the shoulder blade, and they end up kind of overloading the anterior shoulder a little bit. So really important to look at their shoulder extension. How I do that is I'm going to have them lay on their stomach. I pull their shoulder blade back into retraction and depression, that position that I want them to be for the bench press, and then I passively pull them into shoulder extension. When I get them to their max shoulder extension, where they start to feel tight. Now understand that you can really crank them back there if you really pull, but you'll miss some subtle changes in that scapular positioning. So you want to go until you start to feel a little restriction, and then I bend their elbow. And I want to see in that position, do we get to where their hand is in line with their chest? It's just a real quick, easy, dirty way to check their shoulder extension range of motion. Do they have enough motion to get to where they can touch the barbell without having to do any scapular compensation? Finally, the third thing I want to look at is their thoracic spine extension. For a lot of really competitive fitness athletes, power lifters, etc., they're going to work into getting a really, really big arch. And a lot of times you'll see that they have a difficult time actually extending through their thoracic spine, and they end up with this huge thoracolumbar extension rather than getting a full lumbar thoracic extension and hip extension to get into that good arch setup in the bench press. So again, the 3 things I'm going to check out: do they have the ability to do isolated scapular retraction? Do they have good shoulder extension range of motion? And then do they have good thoracic extension? And I'm going to look for those points of performance that we talked about earlier. And a lot of times you'll find these really subtle things going on in their biomechanics and some really major things going on in their programming that has led to kind of a little overloading of some of those anterior shoulder structures and you can create a really good program to get them moving better. And like Jeff always talks about, building the bike, this is something that a lot of times you can make some really quick changes with athletes. Just really quickly do some manual therapy work, some stretching work to improve their shoulder extension, which they've never stretched into, and that will get better, and you can immediately have them jump on the floor and do a push-up, do bench press, and they'll feel better. And then you could do some modifications to their training where you'd have them do things like floor presses to limit their range of motion in that bottom position, so that they're not getting into that point where they can't control the shoulder blade anymore, and that will allow them to train heavy, lift heavy, while not irritating the anterior shoulder as much. Hope those tips give you some help with athletes with bench press pain. I think we got one question here that I'm going to answer. Oh, what's up, Tim? Again, guys, check out the ICE Sampler. That's going to be April 7th in Las Vegas, Nevada. I also want to give you a heads up. It should be next week that the Institute of Clinical Excellence, we're going to be releasing an ebook for y'all to check out. And that's going to be Essential Strength Equipment for the Modern Physical Therapist. My physical therapy student, Steph Spara, who is an excellent physical therapy student, if you're looking to hire somebody, actually put together this ebook for us, where she goes through what are the 10 pieces of equipment that need to be in more physical therapy centers. They're going to have extreme value to creating true strength changes in your athletes. She talked about the benefits of these specific pieces of equipment, as well as some of her favorite drills to use in the clinic for her physical therapy patients. She did an excellent job with it. We're wrapping up kind of the final phases of that. That will be released next week. You'll hear more about it from us next week when we finally get that wrapped up. But I really hope you check it out. It's going to be an amazing resource, and I think a lot of clinicians are going to get a lot out of it. Hope you'll have a great Friday.